When longtime incumbent Chad Collins left his role in Ward 5, there was a lot of speculation in the by-election about who would try to step in. Well, as we know by now, Russ Powers, a former councillor, took the job, but he wasn't going to stay there, which opened up the race to a whole lot of interesting people. One of the people who just joined the race in the last couple of days is Lynda Lukasik. And we wanted to talk to her here on the OShow, not just because you know her from all the time she's been on the program talking about the environment, but because she probably in the field of candidates has had the most momentum in her announcement because of her long time working with Environment Hamilton as their executive director. So I'm fascinated to find out what Lynda thinks she's going to bring to this ward and what that might mean for the future of Ward 5 in the city. Lynda Lukasik, welcome to the OShow.
Thanks very much, Laura.
Well, when your announcement came out, it was greeted with quite a splash. There was even a current councillor, Maureen Wilson, who tweeted out something about it, which is not often something that you see when people announce to run for council. So what has it been like for you the last few days? What has been the reception to your candidacy?
It's been wonderful. And I have to say, it's been a little bit overwhelming. I mean, there have been lots of people who've reached out, who've expressed a lot of excitement and hope for the future. So stressful, but also making me feel more passionate about it and definitely focused on trying to win this race for sure.
Given the fact that you've presented in front of council so many times and have been involved in a number of issues, not the least of which the Stop the Sprawl campaign and other initiatives with Environment Hamilton. But I was surprised, actually, when I got the heads up that you might be jumping into the race. What made you finally decide to take the jump?
We know that there's change coming with quite a few councillors retiring and Mayor Eisenberger retiring. And I think it was just this feeling of you seeing some of the others who were stepping up and being inspired by that as well, and feeling like, if I'm going to take the plunge and give this a try, now feels like a fantastic time to do it.
It seems as though this is a real change election where there will be real change. A number of old guard councillors, and I use that term to describe people who've been there for a long time and had a certain approach to the job. It's not about their age, but a number of long-standing old guard incumbents have left. And we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm and some really challenging races in where there might actually be, if incumbents decide to register, they might not actually win against some of these new candidates. So it does feel as though there's momentum around the idea of change, but there's also criticism, Lynda, of change for change's sake. So when you talk about that feeling that you're getting and that inspiration around council, is it change for change's sake, or do you have a clear vision of what it might mean for Hamilton and for Ward 5?
I have a clear vision, and it's change because change is essential. I would frame it that way. Our mantra at Environment Hamilton has been that we need to build a climate resilient, inclusive city into the future. And I can tell you with certainty that those are principles that I'm carrying forward in my campaign because we're facing a climate emergency. No doubt about that. We're seeing impacts in Hamilton. We know that's only going to get worse. But at the same time, because I don't want to frame this as all doom and gloom, we have fantastic opportunities to, if we make the right choices, see transformative change happen in our city. So I'm thinking about things like the East-West LRT and really capitalizing, if that's the right word, on that piece of higher order transit, doing it in a way that we're going to accommodate more people along that corridor. We're going to ensure that we pay attention to affordability and deep affordability. We're going to make sure we pay attention to climate resilience. I mean, if we did all of those sorts of things with projects like that, and as well as all kinds of other elements that are unfolding in our city, and I'm sitting in Ward 5 where we know Eastgate Square and the Queenston Centennial Corridor are going to be undergoing pretty significant change. We're going to put ourselves in a very good position into the future to be able to shift to what climate experts would call a post-carbon city. And I feel like Hamilton is poised and ready for that to happen. And I'm just focusing on very urban things, but I would add too that in making those kinds of choices, we're also going to put ourselves in a better position when it comes to preservation of farmland and rural natural areas. And all of those important pieces as well. There's that important balance between the urban and rural. So I think that's also a big part of what's inspired me, is that opportunity to get in there and work on the inside to make all of these things that we've been talking about on the outside reality on the ground for our well-being and for the well-being of future generations.
Is it fair to say that you're a one-issue candidate, that the environment and all of that impacts is really why you're running and what you'll focus on?
Yeah, no, I am definitely not a one issue candidate. And I would argue that without a sound environment, nothing else matters. So in my mind, and I feel like my work has always been this way, and if not, if people haven't viewed it that way, I think even more so in recent years, it's an approach that's really focused on sustainability. And that means that you have to pay attention to environment. Obviously, it's the fundamental base. You have to pay attention to economy, and you have to pay attention to social and cultural issues. Those are all critically important. And one thing that I would point to was the emergence of the Just Recovery Hamilton Coalition. And as Environment Hamilton, we've been a key player there. And I think that's really helped us as an organization to come together with other organizations at the community level, working on very different issues and figuring out how we all need to embrace the issues that others are working on. And that's been incredibly helpful. And I think, if anything, it's just reinforced in my mind that everything is connected to everything else. And I really hope that people see that, and people don't try to suggest that I'm a one issue candidate, because all of those pieces need to come together to create livable communities.
I recalled maybe the first time that I met you, or at least the first time you were ever at my Power Group offices downtown, was decades ago. It feels like. And we were there on a group of citizens who were working towards improving the city on something that wasn't environment specific at the time. I mean, being a part of the broader conversations has been something that you've been as a community leader all of these years. But let's talk specifically around Ward 5. I think some people are maybe finally moving away from the notion that the environment is separate from taxation and separate from day-to-day living. But we have the Red Hill running adjacent to your ward, and we know that there has been flooding over the years. We're having the Red Hill inquiry happening right now. I mean, there is a real cost to cities right now, is there not? If there is environmental degradation, if there are mitigation costs a lot of money. In other words, the argument for prioritizing the environment is actually a business case for operating a successful city.
It sure is, yes. And I'm glad that you pointed out the Red Hill issue and the flooding issue. I'm sitting in a neighborhood that flooded when the expressway flooded. And so I know from talking to neighbors, almost every single house in my neighborhood dealt with flooding, and we're all seeing the impacts of that in terms of increased insurance costs. If you want a policy now to cover a second flooding, you're paying more money. So there are examples like that where people have been impacted in really negative ways. And you're right. I mean, doing the right thing is going to save us huge amounts of money in the long run. And doing the right thing, I would add, will increase livability. So if you look at that challenge with flooding, we know that embracing green development standards, for instance, and paying attention to green infrastructure for stormwater management and those sorts of elements, that's going to go a long way to helping us to adapt to and to mitigate climate impacts. And it creates a more livable city and neighborhoods at the same time.
How much has the Sewergate scandal and council's decision, some of them up to 14 times, to vote to keep the depth and breadth of that toxic spill from the people of Hamilton? I mean, how much has that motivated, do you think, yourself to run this time, but also the community to maybe see some of these issues around the environment and cities' management of these things as being really critical to our health and our day-to-day lives, let alone the taxes we're going to have to pay for remediation?
Yeah, look, I've spent decades talking to people about environmental rights, talking to people about the importance of engaging hands-on and improving the environment. And that's all linked to knowledge. And I'll say to people, knowledge is power. So for me, watching how that issue unfolded was incredibly frustrating. And I know that right at the heart of it, in the early days of Sewergate, I've found kind of after the fact that there was a provincial order against the municipality that was never shared with the community. And I think the most frustrating thing for me in the work that I've done over the years is that I know full well that those provincial documents are public documents. So there's one example where more openness and transparency would have gone a long way. It should have happened. We should have been made aware at the outset, and it makes it feel that much more awful knowing after the fact that that public document was there. So I would say in that instance, the city itself should have been sharing that information. But I think we also need to call out higher levels of government with documents like that. There should be an easy way to access information for people who care, right? And I think it's fair to say that Hamiltonians care about these kinds of issues. So I'm certainly all about more openness and transparency, and will certainly fight to ensure more of that happens if I
Well,
am
you might
elected
be
to council.
referring to where they had to post the provincial order and they posted it in the lunchroom, I think. Is that what we're talking about? In
That's
other words,
right.
they
Yes.
followed the
Yeah.
letter of the law,
Yeah.
but not the spirit of the law, which was to
That's
inform
right.
us about the threat to our families and I see you shaking your head. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The extent of the cover up on Sewergate and Coots cover up is painful, and it put us at risk, our environment at risk, our biosphere at risk, our pets at risk, our kids, people who are out there in canoes and kayaks. I mean, it was, to me, as you know, a complete failing by council. So if you were in this situation where the corporate lawyers walk into the in-camera meeting and say, yeah, we screwed up and we're not going to let people know the full extent of it because it looks really bad on us, I'm paraphrasing. What would you do as a counselor, Lynda? Would you say, you know what? My constituents need to know some of this stuff. I can't go along with this. Where would you be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would hope that some of my understanding of these issues, like the provincial system, would help, because I certainly would have challenged that, challenged that decision not to disclose to the public the contents of a provincial officer's order when that's public information, right? So absolutely. And for me, I'll be honest, we've also spent many years as Environment Hamilton providing people with knowledge and skills so that they can go out there and track and monitor and collect data. And I think that's really important too. So we've got the Shadoka Creek example, which is a horrible one. We've also got the reality of a whole lot of other storm sewer, combined sewer discharge points in other sub-watersheds in the city where similar problems still exist. And one of the things that we've done over time is really help to empower community to know when something doesn't look right and to do some observing, documenting, and reporting.
Well, we've
And
talked.
that's certainly the sort of thing that I would,
Yeah.
that I would
Well, I was just
continue
gonna.
to promote and
You
encourage
had in your
constituents to
platform.
do.
You had in your platform that transparency is a priority for you, as well as environment. But you also talked about affordable housing.
Mhm.
And certainly housing has come up. We've seen in the mayoral campaign, it is an issue that the city is really struggling with. What is it that you would do in terms of an approach to the affordable housing challenge? I mean, what can be done, Lynda?
Yeah, it's a big unruly problem. And I think there are things that higher levels of government need to do, but I also think that there are things that municipalities need to be doing as well. So there are non-market housing options. You hear about co-ops and land trusts and not-for-profit entities providing housing. And the municipality itself could be playing a bigger role. And we know, and again, this is from collective advocacy from the outside, we know that the municipality, as a result of a number of organizations pushing, is starting to look at how it can acquire more land in order to purchase, to build housing that's deeply affordable. There are also policies that could be pursued to facilitate affordable housing. So the reality is that because the housing market is so crazy, it's not just social housing, the deeply affordable housing that we need. We need other options too. We're at a point where a lot of Hamiltonians who are maybe lower middle class can't afford housing. So how are we dealing with that? And my understanding is that there are more things that the municipality could be doing. So one example, for instance, is inclusionary zoning around major transit station areas. The municipality can put policies in place to see some of that happen. And that's going to be critically important as we move forward. And I just want to add too, when I talk about affordable housing, I also talk about healthy housing, because the other challenge that we know exists already is that we've got a lot of people, tenants in apartment buildings, for instance, who don't have proper cooling. And as the climate crisis becomes worse, this is a really serious health issue. And we need to figure out ways to provide that heating in winter and that cooling in summer that's not going to exacerbate the climate crisis. So I always say to people, look at fantastic examples like Indwell, for instance, and the city itself, the Ken Sobel Tower retrofit, where passive house standards are being met. And that's a really great way in a climate resilient manner to deal with both the heating and the cooling, which are so important in residential units.
There are so many people in this city who don't have a backyard to cool off in, who don't have air conditioning, who don't have a landlord's responsive to them, and even in Hamilton housing. We often get here at the OShow people letting us know about deplorable living conditions that they're subjected to. And, God forbid a heat wave or, a very cold time during the winter. It can be really terrible to live in Hamilton in some of our so-called affordable housing. And so do you bring to it, Lynda, an urgency that I just don't feel like we've seen from council? I feel like they've talked about it, but the list is massive of people waiting for affordable housing. The conditions continue to be deplorable for many. I mean, how do you bring the urgency to the problem? Indwell is great, but Indwell is working in other communities as well. We've had Jeff on here, the CEO of Indwell. They can't solve all the city's problems. The city itself has to take some accountability for the mess in terms of our housing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't want anyone to think this isn't a major challenge. It sure is, but it feels urgent. It feels urgent when you know that there are people who, are potentially going to experience really negative health impacts because of this situation. And we know the reality is, there was just an article in the Hamilton Spectator quoting Dr. Altaf Arain from the McMaster Center for Climate Change. And he's saying it. We're going to experience more and increasingly hotter days over the summer with the coming years. So we need to get cracking now. It's important. And we need to figure out how to make it work. And my sense is that is going to include tapping into and demanding support from higher levels of government in order to address the challenges that we're facing. And I'm going to add on a positive note that a lot of the work that needs to be done with existing building stock, but also with ensuring that new building stock is where it needs to be, is going to generate green jobs as well. So let's focus on that piece and figure out how we can make this happen in a way that benefits Hamiltonians on a number of levels moving forward.
And I bring up the urgency question, not because you don't reflect the urgency, but because we saw a recent Old Guard counselor, 30 years plus in the job, respond to one of these stories saying, I'm on a rampage to get answer. A 30-year rampage in the making. I mean, it boggles the mind that voters in this city keep accepting that level of, I don't know what we're going to call it. It feels like it's performative, and it rarely ever changes anything. So that's why I'm asking candidates, Lynda, like, where is the real urgency and what are the real solutions? And we can't just praise Indwell all day long, right? We have to do something. Let's talk about the urban boundary, because that is somewhere where, as Craig Kassar, when he was on the OShow talking about his run against Lloyd Ferguson, now Lloyd stepped out of the race, but Craig Kassar is running in Ancaster. And one of the things that he talked about when he did the OShow was, you got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight, that famous Canadian lyric. And what he meant by that was that, the urban boundary movement, Stop Sprawl, was an example where if enough citizens kicked and kicked and kicked at something, you could see some daylight there. And I just, because you were so involved in that and getting those tens of thousands of emails and signatures and whatnot to council to maintain the urban boundary, what did you learn from that, Lynda, about real meaningful change in the city going forward? And also, what needs to still be done on that front? Because I don't think it's a done deal, right? Ford, can't he just say, no, Hamilton, we're going to go ahead and expand that anyway?
Yeah, so I'm going to start on the positive part of that and just say, I have to say, it's one of those funny things as an activist. You can slog away, and believe me, I am persistent. A lot of us, in the activist community, you have to be in Hamilton. There's that importance of pushing over long periods of time for change to happen. So it felt like it was a long, tough slog. And then suddenly something magical happened. And it wasn't just down to the long-term activists. It was lots of wonderful new people emerging who saw and embraced the kind of vision that we've been talking about for a long time. And at least in terms of decision making at the Hamilton level, the rest is history. We all saw and watched in amazement as that movement unfolded. And it was people saying, we're going to take a stand on this. This is important. It's important for us. It's important for future generations in this community. And away we went. And I don't think any of us is taking for granted that outcome. I think we realize that there is that challenge that the provincial government could come in and try to undo the decisions that have been made. But I really hope they don't. And I think there's a danger in them going in that direction, because there are so many people now who are backing this approach. And so many people who've now moved on to talking about what does it need to look like on the ground? How do we start to operationalize this within the urban boundary? And people are excited about it. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting over the coming months. It's going to be really interesting at the start of the term of a new council to see how all of this lands on the ground. And what I hope is that we'll have a council that continues to be very vocal and supportive of the direction that we're going in terms of maintaining that urban boundary and building more climate resilient neighborhoods within it.
So, Lynda, you use the A word yourself. I didn't call you an activist, but you called yourself one.
Yeah.
And as an activist, a longtime activist, there has been, at least from my reading of the political tea leaves, an attempt to disparage activists as radicals, as some sort of extreme barbarians at the gate garbage. This idea that council is going to be overrun with all of these activists with these radical agendas. And is there a risk to having too many new councillors come on to council? Or is that just a false narrative to try to make people afraid that change is coming to Hamilton finally?
Yeah, I think it's a false narrative. I'm going to say because a lot of the people who are in the race in different wards who would be labeled activists are people who've been in this community for a long time, working hard to make positive change. And so I guess what I would say, if someone out there takes offense to me proudly calling myself an activist, then I would say to that, if you have a problem with someone in this community who dedicates a lot of time and energy to trying to make this a better place for everyone, to fighting for the public good, then maybe you have a problem with activism. But if you think all of those things are good things, if you want to see a Hamilton that becomes all that it can be, because I think there's so many of us for so long who it's like that potential is just beyond reach, and we've all been working so hard to make things better. This is a good thing. This is what needs to happen right now. I'd like to believe, and I'm hearing it from people, that people are ready. People are ready for that. They're ready to finally see that Hamilton that we've all envisioned for so long, a place that is inclusive, a place that has great quality of life, no matter what neighborhood you're in, a place with safe streets and open and transparent government. And councillors and wards who are actively engaging their constituents and trying to work towards better things. To me, these are all fantastic things. And that's the way all of us who are activists approach our work on the outside. So if we can bring that into the council chambers and into the city and apply that in the work that we do, I don't see a downside to any of that.
I don't either. I think that it's beyond time that people who have been working hard on so many issues and have real expertise sit around the council chamber, and instead of assuming they know everything and not listen to their constituents, actually bring what they know and listen to what they don't and work together collaboratively. I feel like that vision is possible on October 24th, depending on how people vote. Lynda, you are always positive, no matter how dire the file you're working on seems to be at times. What can you just leave with the people in Ward 5 about why they may want to vote for you, or where they may want to find your information as they make their important decision?
Sure. Yeah. So I've lived in the ward for a long time, and I know for a lot of people that's people will look to that. So I've been in the ward since 1995. I'm a lifelong Hamiltonian. I know that it's a very diverse ward. If you think about Ward 5, we moved from the Hamilton Beach community down to where I am. I feel like I'm in the epicenter near Eastgate and the eastern terminus of the future LRT and a lot of the redevelopment that's coming. So I'd like to think I bring some expertise there because I know the neighborhood, and as someone living in it, you could be sure I want to make sure that redevelopment happens the way that it should be. And then we've also got areas like Stony Creek and the old town center there, nestled up against the Niagara Escarpment, and other neighborhoods in that ward that are all very different. And so I guess my message would be that I'm going to do my best to learn even more and to listen to people in different parts of the ward. We're going to be out there soon, starting to knock on doors. I'm going to knock on as many doors as I can before October 24th. And I hope that people see that, with the work that I've done so far through Environment Hamilton, and even prior to that, that I have done my best to make improvements in the ward, whether it's paying attention to industrial pollution and the prevailing winds that bring it down to the Hamilton Beach community, and I'll continue that work. I'm still doing it now. To paying attention to Red Hill, the old Swaru incinerator. I want to share that story. That's something that I was involved in using the Provincial Environmental Bill of Rights along with another Hamiltonian, and we set the groundwork for seeing that facility closed, and it had huge impacts in this ward. So I hope I bring a history and I bring current work that people will appreciate and will be a good indication to them that I'll continue to be a fighter and persistently push for positive change.
Well, thank you so much, Lynda. And do you have a website they can go to?
I do, yes. It's lukasikWard5.ca, and I should say it's not live yet, but it will be within the next day or two.
Well, as I said, your candidacy came out with a splash, and I know you've been doing a lot of media on that. And there are other people running, of course, in Ward 5. You can go to the city's website to find all the names, or iElect is keeping a list, updating regularly of all the people who are running in all the wards. Lynda, thank you for being on the show. And regardless of whether people vote for you or for one of the other candidates, I appreciate anyone who steps up and puts their name out there. It's not easy to do. And I just hope that everybody watching the OShow votes October 24th and get your neighbors and your family to vote. That's the only way we get the change that we need in this community, is if we all get active in our democracy. So thank you so much, Lynda, once again for being on the OShow.
Thanks, Laura.